everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking about The Assassin's Blade. There's a lot of debate about when to read this book, whether to read it before Throne of Glass or after Crown of Midnight or after Heir of Fire. I've read it after Crown of Midnight. And I'm so glad that I did. I think everyone that read it a certain way probably prefers the order that they read it in. I think it had good emotional impact here at book 3 in the series. I think that if I'd read it before Throne of Glass, I wouldn't have cared as much about Celaena, perhaps. I liked reading Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, getting the reveal at the end of Crown of Midnight, and then going back to see what her life looked like before she was thrown into Endovir, knowing that that's where she'd end up, kind of knowing what would happen to Sam Cortland and what would happen with Arobynn. Because in Throne of Glass and in Crown of Midnight, we do learn the basics of what happens in this book. We even learn some little details, like the fact that she stole a Styrian stallion or a mare or whatever. So then it's quite nice to get these hints from Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight and then go back for the more context. If you'd read it first, you'd have all of the context and then you would understand the references. But I quite like the mystery of getting the references but finding the whole story out later. I think you get enough tidbits from kind of Celaena's inner monologue from Throne of Glass and Crown of Night to not have to read this at all, but it does increase your knowledge of Celaena and her character and make her make a little bit more sense. It also adds to your anger for her. It makes you hate Arobynn and what's the character called that killed Sam, the torturing one? Can't remember his name. Read it last week, can't remember. Makes you hate those guys and want revenge, which she actually doesn't get in Throne of Glass or Crown of Midnight, and we're not really sure why. When you read Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight first, you're not sitting there questioning why hasn't she gone after Arobynn? Why is she not as traumatized as she should be? Because horrible stuff happens in this book. She goes to Endovir pretty traumatized, and we know she's further traumatized by Endovir. But then there's only small references to this Assassin's Blade story in Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, so why isn't Celaena going back there in her mind so much? And it's probably because she is traumatized and she's compartmentalizing it and putting it out of her mind quite a lot. A reveal about Sam when she's playing the piano, it's kind of halfway through Throne of Glass if I remember, so I think she is heavily suppressing the stuff that happened in this story. But then you read this third and you finally get all of that context and you're like, well, I hope actually in Heir of Fire or in Queen of Shadows or one of the future books she does go back and get that revenge on Arobynn, or maybe she'll move on from it so she doesn't feel she has to, or maybe she'll have to tie up those loose ends as Celaena before she goes on to be Aelin. Don't know, that's what my prediction is. I'm not there yet. I'm currently halfway through Heir of Fire, but yeah, no spoilers, but that's what I think will probably happen. We have Chaol in Heir of Fire ask this question kind of halfway through the first half. I've read the first half. He kind of questions after Celaena told me all that, I wonder why she didn't hunt down Arobynn, and I'm like, yeah, exactly, why? So because he said that, I think we will get those answers eventually, but that's why I'm glad I read it first, and I think it probably has more emotional impact here. I'm hoping I'll be proved right, because otherwise you'd feel a bit disappointed by the fact that she doesn't address it as much in Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, and by the time you got to Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows where something might happen, my prediction, then you would have forgotten a lot of Assassin's Blade by that point, perhaps. It wouldn't be as fresh and relevant in your mind. Hopefully reading this first, it's now fresh and relevant enough that it will make impact when she does address it again. Fingers crossed. But yeah, maybe without spoilers, let me know in the comments if you read it first or third or fourth and how that impacted the way you experienced the story. I think it's nice that we can have a debate about whether you read it in which order. It was published third, I believe, but it was written first because Sarah J Maas wrote all of the short stories. It's 5 short novellas and she published them online, and then she kind of got her publishing deal from that, published Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, and then they went back, edited and published those novellas, and that's this. So that's why there's some debate about the reading order. Now let's get into the story itself. If you're reading it third, you already know that she ends up in Endover, and that Sam ends up getting butchered and killed, and that she was probably betrayed by Arobynn. If you read it first, you don't know that, so then this book's going to be like a bit mind-blowing and a bit shocking. However, like, knowing this going into the book, knowing how it's going to end, I think it does add to a lot of suspense and intrigue as well. And going into it knowing that her and Sam loved each other, it's a bit of a surprise when you go into the first story about the pirates and they're kind of enemies, and Selena's basically debating killing him, thinks he wants to kill her. And it tells you a lot about Selena's experience with Arobynn, how he's raised her to think. She's not had much experience romantically at this point. She's kind of just a machine of murder and hate, which Arobynn has been kind of honing into his own weapon. We get this first story about the pirate lord and her rescuing all of these slaves from Eowyn. This adds some context to her friendship with Nehemia, and it's a nice, thrilling, action-packed story. It's very Pirates of the Caribbean, and like her and Sam sort of form a bit of a friendship over the course of this story. We see how she functions as an assassin. She's only 16, and we see her wearing her mask to hide her identity. It's cool to see what her life looked like before Endover, before becoming the King's Champion, and see her actually just being Adarlan's assassin and the reputation that she has. She frees these slaves because it's the right thing to do. It's, not much of a hot take, like, ooh, slavery bad, rescue slaves good, quite black and white. But then the consequences of her doing that are catastrophic, and it kind of goes downhill from here as the book goes on because she's done this. You can see the context this gives her character of a White in Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight. She's a lot more submissive, and she overlooks kind of the atrocities of the king a little bit more because, she tried to do the right thing, and she was heavily punished for it. You can see why that would scare anyone into submission. We then move on to the next story, The Assassin and the Healer, and we skip a little bit of time. Selena is in this kind of rundown pub by the sea, and there's a barmaid there who we get some perspective from, who is a healer or wanted to become a healer. We find out that Arobynn had heavily punished Selena. He beat her unconscious, and he's left marks all over her face to remind her of the bad that she's done. And something bad's happened to Sam. He's probably been beaten too, but she doesn't know. She's just been sent away to the Red Desert. So this whole story takes place just in this pub, and between her and this barmaid and this healer. Selena's very jaded and very down about what's happened. She's very angry. The barmaid, we learn about her history, which is good because it kind of opens up the world. We learn about where she came from. Did she come from Fenharrow or Melisande? I think she came from Fenharrow. Can't remember, but we learn a little bit more about what she went through. Her mother was a healer, and she was killed when Adarlan, the Empire, kind of destroyed all of the magic people, and she ran out of money, so she's ended up stuck working at this pub, but she really wants to go on and go to the healer's school on the continent. Selena ends up helping her. She teaches her some self-defense. She's not a very warm person, Selena. She's, quite cold, and she's quite hard on this healer, but she does train her, and in the end she ends up giving her money and her brooch that Arobynn gave her, which this woman can then go on and pay for a passing to the continent to go to the healer's quadrant. And yeah, it's a nice little breather, this story. It's just a bit of a character moment. We kind of see how Selena is feeling. We see how she's feeling about Arobynn. And we learn a bit more about the world. After this, we go on to the middle story in the desert, which also expands the world a lot more. Selena kind of gets a ship, treks across the Singing Sands, which is a really cool concept, treks across the desert and goes to the Assassin's Keep there. These are called the Silent Assassins. And the setting's really cool. It's described as the sand is very red. Selena then kind of has a bit of a Karate Kid kind of narrative. She trains there. She makes a friend named Ansel, who's kind of a cool character in the beginning at least. And eventually she does some training with the silent kind of master. Can't remember what his name was. And they kind of just copy like a snake and a bat, and she kind of learns from the desert animals and learns how to move and stuff like that, becomes a better assassin. Very Karate Kid. There was a lot of elements from like other stories in this story. Like there's a moment where they steal horses, they start the Asterian mares, and they kind of gallop away from the town and they jump this canyon, and it was very Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. So it was like Karate Kid and Spirit. The first one was like Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah, there was a lot of very kind of obvious inspirations. But yeah, we get this story. We see her missing Sam. There's like almost a romance with the kind of assassin king's son, I guess. Can't remember his name, but she doesn't end up kissing him because she's thinking about Sam. We learn a lot about Ansel. Ansel kind of goes to the town and liaises with the people there. There's like a rivalry between the assassins and the people of this town, this army, and they are constantly fighting. We learn about Ansel's history. She tells us a lot more about the witches, which is cool if you read this after Crown of Midnight, because it gives you more context about the Iron Teeth witches. We see why Celaena had such a reaction when she met Baba Yellowlegs initially and why she was so scared. We hear Ansel telling her about how the witch ate her friend, essentially, and how her family were like brutally killed. And she is motivated by wanting to get back to Briarcliff, I think it's called, and win back her home. So she actually does have quite a similar backstory to Celaena, losing everything, losing her family, and wanting to reclaim her kingdom. You would know that if you'd read Crown of Midnight, but if you read this first, then you don't know that. And yeah, we grow to kind of like Ansel. She's the first female friend that Celaena's ever really made. She didn't really have friends before. And that's why it hurts so much when Ansel turns out to betray her, betray the assassins, and she kills a bunch of people, tries to kill the leader of the assassins, but Celaena saves him. She almost kills Ansel in retaliation, but she kind of staves her arrow and lets her leave, and Ansel returns to her home. So I'm hoping Ansel comes back in a future story. I do think she was an interesting character. She was a bit morally grey, which is cool. Would like to see if she wins back her home and if she'll eventually turn to the good in the future or if she'll go full evil. After this, the leader of the assassins gives Celaena a bunch of gold, which she can then use to pay off Arobynn and free herself from his clutches. So she returns back to Rifthold, and we have the story of the assassin and the underworld. We see her relationship with Sam. It's a bit tense, but over the course of the story they kind of form a bond and form a relationship and fall in love. We see her tense relationship with Arobynn, but we see how he gives her lots of gifts and kind of grooms her into staying with him and coming back with him. We start to learn a lot more about their relationship and how he has essentially groomed her from being a 10-year-old, and their relationship isn't purely professional. There's a bit of possession in there, and Celaena seems to have complicated feelings towards him. They're not necessarily romantic, but potentially like slightly. She's not attracted to him, but she does have a complex relationship with him, which I find really interesting. It's really frustrating, especially knowing how the story ends, watching her be kind of brought back on his side. You kind of screaming at her to just get out and run, pay him off, leave the continent. But she doesn't do that. Instead, he kind of ensnares her back into his clutches to do this final contract for him, which will pay a lot of money, which she's like, that would be good to have because it will help me better escape his clutches. Which is kind of how abusers operate. He's finding ways to keep her around by manipulating her resources, essentially. So we see her and Sam do this whole kind of plot, this assassination plot, and they succeed. And he gives her this almost as a gift. It's like, you can bring down people that are going to further slavery, and since you freed the slaves in the beginning, I know you're against slavery, so here's something you can do and earn money and still be in my good books. In the end, we find out that this guy that she assassinated was actually trying to help the slaves make free houses, etc. And she actually just destroyed that whole plot and actually furthered the agenda of the king and of the slavers and of Arobynn. So she was betrayed by Arobynn again. not good, and you know, a lesson that she had to learn, I suppose. But she doesn't go all the way. She's supposed to collect a letter and deliver it back to the person who paid the contract, and she doesn't do that. She burns the letter because that will stop her agenda of furthering slavery, actually. So she helps the way she can, but it's already too late. We have a cool scene in here where she goes to a ball, and actually Kale and Dorian turn up. They're in a masquerade, I think. And if you hadn't read Throne of Glass or Crown of Midnight first, you wouldn't recognise that it was them, and you'd probably forget by the time you got onto Throne of Glass. But having read those books, I can see that it is them. Dorian kind of tries to flirt with her. She goes off, and it's just a very small moment, but I thought that was a cool little Easter egg. This is quite an exciting story as well. I didn't find it as exciting as maybe the desert one, but you see, you know, Celaena's normal life working as an assassin, living in the Assassin's Keep under Arabin. So it gives a lot more context to her, you know, in retrospect, reading it third, to like what her life was like before in Dover. And it's quite gritty. We see her nearly die in the sewers. She nearly drowns and basically in shit, which is quite thrilling. I like that she is, you know, I said in my Throne of Glass video, she's quite vain. She likes cosmetics and fashion and being clean and stuff like that. She is quite a girly girl. She's a, well, I wouldn't say she's a girl's girl. She doesn't really have any female friends or any friends properly, but she's a girly girl. She's feminine. But yeah, then she also has these experiences that really dirty her up, and she really gets her hands dirty, literally. So it's cool to see like this duality in her. And yeah, it's quite a gritty near death. Then we move into the final story, The Assassin and the Empire, and this is a really tragic tale where, you know, if you've read Throne of Glass, you know how it ends. It starts off with a bit of before, so you start off this story even if you've read it first in the order. She's in the prison cart going to Endovir, and then you see what's happened, so you still get this element of knowing it all ends in tears. In this story, Sam and Celaena are pretty done with Arabin because he betrayed them and manipulated them into doing a contract that was very against Celaena and Sam's beliefs. So they have moved out to Celaena's apartment, and they're trying to gather money to move elsewhere, get away from Arabin because they recognise that he's dangerous and he's manipulative. But Arabin has kind of blocked them from doing other contracts because they're still like part of the Assassin's Guild, so it should go through kind of the contracts, and that makes it hard for them to get a job. Nonetheless, they find a job, and it's very suspicious from the outset, and it's very well paid, and it's basically taking down the number one and number two of like the crime lords of the whole city. And because of like Celaena's character flaw, Celaena is arrogant. She thinks she's the best. Maybe she is the best, but she's still fallible, and that really comes across here. A criticism I had for Throne of Glass that I didn't say in my video was that she is very vain and arrogant, but that never like costs her anything, and I really feel like a character flaw should cost someone something. Kind of like the way Ned Stark's character flaw is that he's, you know, he's honourable, which is a strength, but he's too honourable to the point where it makes him almost naive and too black and white. So he's very easily manipulated by characters like Littlefinger that are a lot more grey, because he's very like tunnel vision into what's right and wrong. So it costs him his life. Spoilers for Game of Thrones, I guess. And yeah, I feel like Celaena's arrogance and her vanity should cost her something, which it doesn't in Throne of Glass. But that's because in Assassin's Blade, she is arrogant and it does cost her everything. So I can take back that criticism, I guess. Still holds if you read Throne of Glass first, makes it less of a good book. But if you've read Assassin's Blade first, it's fine. It's explained. So yeah, her arrogance in thinking that she can do this costs her everything, and it also costs Sam. So Sam is not as good as Celaena, he's not as notorious, and he's a little bit insecure about that, so he wants to take on the number two for himself. It's understandable, he wants to like be the man, he wants to protect Celaena, and Celaena's like, well, I can help you because it is difficult, and he's kind of like, no. and that's ends up being his downfall, and it ends up getting him killed and tortured really brutally. And that's the crux of this story, is, you know, just how they try to pursue this contract. It's clearly a setup from Arabin. They're a little bit blind to that. I think Selena is blind to it because she's been so groomed and manipulated by Arabin. Even when she's trying to get away from him, she's conflicted, she's drawn back to him, and she underestimates how much he can betray her and how evil he could be, even though she shouldn't, even though he's beat her to a pulp. It's like, yeah, it's basically an abusive relationship where, despite the fact that Arabin has abused her and betrayed her, she still finds herself justifying that almost, and underestimating him. So Sam is killed. She doesn't see that Arabin has manipulated the situation and puts too much trust in him. In her like devastation, she isn't thinking clearly, and she's very easily manipulated into then hunting down the man to get revenge. She kills the number 1 crime lord and is then captured by the number 2 crime lord. And it turns out that the number 2 crime lord and Arabin collaborated to get Selena and Sam to kill the number 1, so that number 2 could become the number 1. Him and Arabin can kind of run this city as the crime lords and assassin king that they are. And in the process, kill Sam, get rid of him, because he's tried to take what is Arabin's by falling in love and being with Selena. Arabin can't handle other men having Selena. And so rather than, you know, just say this, he decides to destroy Sam and Selena and get Selena sent to the salt mines and basically crush her spirit in every way that he can. You know, he wants her all for himself, and if he can't have her, then he would destroy her. And is a very evil man. And yeah, Selena is utterly depressed. She's betrayed. She's sent to the salt mines. She's a shell of a person. On the way to the salt mines, she sees the Lord of the North, which is a stag in the woods. That brings back a little bit of something inside her as she goes into the salt mines. And then the book ends. And that's the story. We pick it up at Throne of Glass. She spent a year in the salt mines, and yeah, she then goes on to become the King's Champion and get into the whole main plot of the series. But yeah, this book was a wild ride. It was, 5 novellas, but they were all very linked. It did follow one story arc. It introduced a lot of different aspects of the world. Saw different literal countries and areas in the world, and you learned a lot more about Selena as a character, Arabin, Sam, all of the, dynamics in those relationships. And I'm really happy that I read it third in the order, because I don't think those things are explored enough in Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, but I think those things do become more relevant, into Heir of Fire and probably as we go on as well. So I would recommend this book. I would recommend reading it where I have in the order, but if you read it fourth or first as well, let me know what you thought and how that impacted your enjoyment of this book. I think if I'd read it first, I might care less about the characters and I might be a bit more confused about the world, and then I might be like, why are we spending so much time at the Glass Castle then? I quite like starting the series in the Glass Castle and Rifthold and then expanding out gradually as we go. I think Assassin's Blade has a bigger scope in terms of setting, and then it could kind of go down to the Glass Castle for Throne of Glass. I think that would be less enjoyable, but I don't know. Let me know what you think. I keep calling Rifthold Riften because in Skyrim there's a city called Riften and it's quite similar. It's got a thieves guild and it's got ratways underneath the town where a lot of the crime happens, and in this book there's a similar kind of, there's the sewers, there's the underground, there's like where all of the crime happens, which is a little bit like the Ratway and the Thieves Guild in Skyrim. So noticing a lot of similarities between Skyrim and this story actually. Like in Heir of Fire there's some whites. Very, very like Skyrim. But that's everything. That's my thoughts. Loved it. 4 stars? Yeah, maybe a little bit more. Like, the more books I read in the series, the more I'm starting to enjoy it. And I'm halfway through Heir of Fire and I'm really enjoying it. I'm just devouring it at the moment. So yeah, I will continue with the series. Next videos, don't know, will probably be Heir of Fire and then maybe Queen of Shadows, and then I'll probably take a break before I get into the tandem read and the Kingdom of Ash, because they're kind of behemoths, and I'm a very slow reader. Let me know if I should do the tandem read or not for Empire of Storm's Tower of Dawn. Haven't decided yet, a little bit overwhelmed by the idea of reading 2 books at the same time, but we'll see, because if it's going to improve my enjoyment, then, well, I want to do that. So let me know. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more. It won't all be Throne of Glass, like I'll have a break, do Hunger Games, maybe do a few other books. And yeah, I'm going to review some old books that I've read last year as well. So then that, you know, will keep the non-Sarah J Maas people, because I know not everyone likes her, that will keep you guys happy. Follow me on Instagram as well, I might just follow you back. And thank you for watching. Bye!